Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this conversation. My name is Sydney Ellison, and I'm the programs manager here at Baxter Street. I'm so excited that you all could come out tonight, despite the cold, to join us for this conversation between our 2025 Mid-Career Lens-Based Artist Initiative recipient, Morgan Levy, and fellow artists and friends, Genesis Báez and Ries, on the occasion of Morgan's solo exhibition, Spark of a Nail, here at Baxter Street. I'm going to introduce Carly and Genesis, and then Genesis is going to introduce Morgan, and we'll get into this all. Ries is an artist living in Brooklyn, New York. Their photo books are held in the collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Victoria and Albert Museum, Ries Museum, and the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, among others. Ries is the curator of the Peter J. Cohen Collection, a vast archive of 20th century vernacular photography. Genesis Báez is an artist working with photography, currently living in Brooklyn, New York. Her works have recently been exhibited at the Chazen Museum of Art, the Whitney Museum, and Dashwood Projects. Her first monograph, Blue Sun, was published this year by Capricious. She currently teaches at Princeton University.
Thank you. Thanks. So nice to see you guys, see friends old and new here. Thanks for coming out. I'm going to introduce Morgan, a good friend that I've known since we were in graduate school together some years back. So Morgan is a photo-based artist and educator originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She's exhibited her work both nationally and internationally, most recently at Light Industry Large Glass Gallery in London, V&A Parasol Foundation, at Copeland Gallery, also in London, Vermont Center for Photography, and Gallery Kanski in Iceland. Her editorial work has been featured in US and international publications. She received her MFA in photography from the Yale School of Art, a BFA from the Tisch School of the Arts at New York University, and she teaches at Parsons School of Design, where she teaches photo. And she lives in Brooklyn with her partner and child.
Hi. Thank you everyone for coming out on a really cold night. Thank you, Carly and Genesis, for agreeing to come and talk with me. I have known both Carly and Genesis for a number of years now, and I'm very lucky to have them as, hi Spandita. I'm very lucky to have them as part of my photo community and also have them as friends. I wanted to have a conversation, and I thought when I invited them we were going to be talking about all of our work, and they insisted that we mainly focus on the show that you're all sitting in right now. But that is because I am not an artist that enjoys working in isolation. Conversation is a fundamental part of my practice and mode of being in the world. It's how I learn what I'm doing and thinking about. I can think through those ideas so much more richly and fully through conversation. And both Genesis and Carly have been part of the foundation of this work for years. They have seen this work grow and mature and have offered tremendous feedback. And so it felt really exciting to have you both here to be part of this iteration of the work. We spoke a little bit before the conversation, and we were trying to kind of think through a framework for the for the talk tonight. And through our conversation, it brought us to the idea that we wanted to use the space of the gallery as the form for the talk, to use the architecture of the space you're all sitting in. And so tonight we're going to start by looking at this wall, and then we're actually going to ask everyone to pivot, and we're going to sort of move to the back wall, to this wall, and then finally over here. And so we're going to sort of move through the space together as a mode of moving through the conversation. Yeah?
That sounds great.
Hi. So we thought of some different questions, Genesis and I, for how to invite everyone into Morgan's process for thinking through photographs, which is also a way of cueing all of you into the conversations that we have when we're together, what we think about, and the ways that photography can be enacted today, and thinking about the ways of what a display mechanism can bring and why we love photographs. And so I'm going to start with our first question. And we're thinking about the works on this wall behind me, including right here, these two images, which have been paired together. The one on the left is called Just Shimmering, and the one on the right is called Emily Refracted. So my question for you is, looking at your photographs, I am reminded of documentary images from the 20th century, the early 20th century, depicting labor and the evolution of industry. And these photographs often merge the identity of the subject with the work they perform and the tools and machinery that they interact with. And my question is, how do you engage with the history of those kinds of images, and where does your work depart from them?
So, just in the way that when we're in the studio, we kind of riff on photo histories and we aren't necessarily writing an essay, I'll sort of speak like that right now. But when making this work, and so far as early 20th century imagery goes, I looked a lot at Lewis Hines's Women at Work book. It's a remarkably beautiful collection of photographs whose beauty is obviously quite different from the horrible working conditions that it's depicting. But at the formal level, these photographs are amazingly beautiful. And I was looking at them to understand how were bodies being placed in relation to machines, where was the light coming from. But I think what's important to note about Hines is that he had a very particular agenda. He was looking to very clearly, through very clear images, both document and then reform the working conditions for women and children. And so clarity is a really big part of that work. But what I think is also amazing about those photographs is that when he published them, he would sometimes publish them with the names and the addresses of the children. And there was this incredible investment in really helping the viewer understand these were real people. And so what I find kind of amazing about those images is that I don't look at them and see people just merged with machinery. I see a gesture toward really trying to portray the humanity of individuals. That was just one history of photography that I was looking at. I was looking at a lot of imagery from mid-century Life magazine pictures, which on the whole they really lack images of collective action, especially collective action of groups of women or minorities. The heroic singular white male plays a big role in those photographs. Many of them are equally beautiful at the formal level, but there are certain absences in that work. The work I spent the most time with, however, kind of starts right around Betsy Medgar's Women at Work book, which is this wonderful, wonderful book. She is known for her investigative reporting, but made this book. She photographed in 1974, and the book was published in 75. And she traveled around the country with the intent of photographing an extremely wide range of work, not with the intention of having any kind of editorializing as to whether or not these jobs were good or not, but it was to show that there were women in a tremendous array of work, and to kind of put to rest this notion of work as a gendered thing. And then from those pictures, I also looked a ton at images from Tradeswomen magazine, which is a wonderful publication that existed, was run by a group of tradeswomen. And it is this proto-internet material that was meant to serve as a tool of connectivity. Still true today, very much true then. Tradeswomen, and I'll just say right now that when I use the term woman, I really kind of looked to Sarah Ahmed's notion of anyone who travels under the sign of woman. So just when I say tradeswomen, that's kind of what I'm holding in my mind. But this was, tradeswomen were and still are, they can be very isolated geographically on job sites. And so Tradeswomen Magazine was a wonderful publication that had so many photographs, had poetry, had practical advice about what pants to wear, what tool belt people were wearing. So much of the clothing was not designed for particular bodies. And so I was looking at Tradeswomen Magazine, Jean Tetrault, who went on to create the Women's Carpentry book, which is another incredible book filled with photographs. She was one of the founding editors of Tradeswomen Magazine. Many of these photographs have a beautiful present life in Carmen Winant's work, I'll just note. But these were many of the kind of images of labor that I was spending a lot of time with.
I'm curious how you see your own work departing from those images. Firstly, because those images were usually kind of made with the intention of circulating and kind of living either in archives or circulating in the mass media. Like you could go to a store and buy this magazine. Curious where you depart.
So one thing that, and I think this is a nice image to sort of point to kind of talk about that. All of the different kind of photographers that I just talked about had, I think, very particular and important agendas. Mm-hmm. And so clarity was a really important component of that, to really show, in the instance of Tradeswomen Magazine, they really wanted to show very clearly these individuals doing this work. It was an imperative for them to make themselves seen, because when they first entered the trains, nobody wanted them there. Mm-hmm. Nobody took pictures of them. And so they really had to document themselves. And so there's a lot of documentation happening in those photographs. Mm-hmm. And so I'd say my point of departure is that I'm not working in a documentary mode. I'm kind of, in certain instances, pulling on that as a mode of making, but I'm reaching toward less clear images, less clarity is less of a necessity in every image, though it plays a role in the work.
I think these two images here that Carly pointed to in the beginning are a really good example of that. Like one of them, the person is literally turning into water, or you can't see them, right? And then in the other one, they are multiplying and kind of refracting, and they're both becoming part of the materials and the spaces that they are engaging with.
I have a question about materials, since you just mentioned how in the pictures up behind us, the images of them they're merging with their materials. But for the image in the center, it's multiple images that are being brought together in one frame. Could you talk a little bit about how you came to break the rectangular format?
I think one of the things that I observed a lot in these spaces were incomplete forms. You would see the raw materials of things that would become something else later on. You'd see things in progress. And to this idea of clarity or lack of clarity, I became interested in how to fold ideas of something coming into being, or something incomplete, or something that requires perhaps another party to complete, like a viewer. I started to think about that. And so this form of an image that is traveling across space that is not a complete image became something that came into the work.
The wheel's turning.
Well, I think with this image in the middle here, can you remember the title?
Oh, we can also talk about this a little more. So this is called Traveling Form Number 1, Anna. And in the images, this is Anna. She is a carpenter in Massachusetts. We have become friends through this work. And when I knew that the show was going to happen, I called Anna up and I was like, I need you to make something for me. And I need to photograph you while you make it. And that needs to be a piece. And that happened at just like a purely intuitive level. Cause I just had known Anna for several years at that point. I always knew I wanted her presence to be like a big part of the work. And so we'll talk about the form a little bit more, I think, in a bit. But so what you're looking at are images of Anna creating the form that the images of her are currently hanging on. And so that Anna made this frame and Anna made the one in the corner as well.
Yeah, I want to say, I think this is one of my favorite pieces in the exhibition because the wall and the shadows and the negative space between the fragmented images. Can I stand and walk up to? Okay, cool. Hi, everybody. Teacher mode. I love this space right here, this kind of 1.5 inch rectangle, because it mimics the piece of wood that is photographed, kind of like echo, like the negative space between images and the shadows that the whole piece itself is casting echoes the forms in the image. So I love how it spills out of the rectangle of the actual image and becomes part of the space, and the space becomes part of the work in a really, really nice way.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I think like this picture I made, I don't know, maybe a year into making the work, and it kind of was a discovery for how to move forward in terms of a kind of both how it operates at like a metaphorical level, how it's not reliant on total clarity, the kind of sort of liquidy aspect of it, its incompleteness as an image. And I think I tried to think about other ways to like re-perform that in the work, and then within the material presentation as well.
When you say clarity, are you also meaning like legibility or visibility?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
They're all of the above. Yeah. Interesting.
Should we pivot?
Yeah, let's pivot.
Okay.
There's lots to talk about.
We're gonna pivot over here. So a nice unforeseen part of this is that now I have a totally different relationship with the room, and I see all these people I didn't know were here. Hi, good to see you. How lovely.
We really thought that this, while it's unusual perhaps to move around the room, we wanted this to feel more engaging than your average talk where everyone is static, because the work isn't static and you haven't all had a chance perhaps to look at all of the work so instead of having a conversation in front of one wall, we appreciate you collaborating with us. So put my phone down. So I spent time looking at this work throughout different iterations, and one of the things that really surprised me when I finally saw the show in person and saw the works not just in print form, not in a book dummy form, and not on the computer or my phone, because I sometimes would receive text messages with questions, and when I saw the show in person, one of the things that really struck struck me was that this photograph behind us, this large photograph, is almost human scale. And it was one of those things that it seems so straightforward, but when we look at pictures of people, sometimes we forget to register that there was a relationship there. So one of my questions is, how does collaboration get enacted in your work?
So I'll just say I'm also freezing. So if I seem like I'm shivering or I'm tense, I'm just so cold right now. So forgive me if I'm just like this right now. So collaboration, I discovered early on that was going to be really the best mode of making this work. I was photographing people really at the beginning of the process, and I realized that one of the challenges is that when you're watching people do their work, they're often staring at the wall. And so you can't see their face. And you also can't really then see what they're doing. And I realized I needed to come up with strategies to have them essentially re-perform what they do, but for the camera. And so this kind of collaboration came into being in part out of necessity. But what that also engendered was me being able to learn so much from them, because we'd have conversations about okay, well, what are you doing? And then what are the next steps? And why do you do that? And so this element of collaboration was a process of learning for me. I do not come from the world of trades. I have learned minimal woodworking skills for this show, but I don't have meaningful skills in this way. And so this collaboration made a lot of space for me to really understand what they're doing, and to just talk about other things. And so there was this sort of initial necessity for it. What I'll also say is that this kind of collaboration really allows for me to sort of disrupt the ways in which power has been modeled in these spaces historically. So while one of the kind of texts that really tipped me off to some ideas of this work was reading Audre Lorde's Uses of the Erotic. And in that, she's writing about kind of the ways in which male power has been modeled and how that gets placed upon other people. And that gave me a framework to think about how to disrupt that. Mm-hmm. And so performance was a way to make trouble, and to direct and have agency through directing, but also then really kind of be in cahoots with the individuals in the photograph. And so the way that I would often work is I'd kind of I would watch them do the work that they really do. And I would sort of I'd put my camera down often for that part of the process and really just watch. And then let that sort of churn in my brain. And what that allowed was for me to kind of distill what I was seeing into a more metaphorical image, or perhaps just see what they were doing more photographically. Mm-hmm. And so collaboration was then me talking through that with them, saying, would you really do this? Occasionally we took certain liberties, but tried to really stay true to actions that they would do, because the stakes are really high for these individuals in these spaces. And so I never would want to do anything that would really undermine their professional integrity. And so, yeah, I think that, yeah.
Well, I actually have a follow-up question, which is, I guess we haven't fully explained not the thesis of the show, but thinking about who these people are and where you encountered them, and when did you initially realize that you wanted to photograph working women as they did manual labor, and if you could talk about almost the beginning of it, that might be another way of thinking also about collaboration.
So I'll just say, I became interested in watching individuals transform space. That was really the impulse and the draw. When I was in graduate school, I met a woman named Stacy, who was the only woman in a granite quarry's 250-year history to work there. And when I met her, she was seated behind a desk in a shipping container answering phones because she had been injured. And while she had recovered, her boss had told her she was good at communication. And so despite the fact that she had wanted to get back out to cut stone in this small project-based quarry, she was seated behind a desk. And essentially, over the course of about 9 months, I would go and sit with her in this office and we would talk. And I finally convinced her to make a picture. We made a picture together, and I brought it to her, and she looked at it and she said, "This is nice, but it's not real." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "Well, if the guys don't really see me doing this work, it's as if it's not real." And that sort of opened up a tinderbox of questions about the intersection of gender and labor and whose bodies we expect to see in what spaces. And the quarry, one of the things that was remarkable about what Stacy ultimately showed me is how you can actually move a 2-ton boulder with really modest means. You can really transform space with exceptionally modest means. And of course, there are fraught histories that move through spaces of extraction, but I was really drawn to her skills and her expertise. And so we ultimately sort of broke into the quarry together after work, and she really did perform the work of cutting stone for me. And I cast someone who looked like me to play a role of the photographer. And so it's this sort of Sophie Calle-esque dance between these, what are ultimately 3 characters, the quarry woman, the photographer, and then obviously the viewer, which was me, kind of moving through these spaces. And so this was an early way in which performance and staging kind of started to flow through these other themes. And then if they're like living in the world as a woman, you come to understand if there is one woman experiencing something, there are many women experiencing something. And so I thought if there is one Stacy, there are many Stacys. And in the pandemic, I started researching and trying to understand, like, where else could I find these ideas? Where else could I explore these ideas of individuals transforming space? And what images do I want to see? And I kind of made that work with Stacy in the shadow and murk of the 2016 election. I was looking for a literal feminist scaffolding to climb out of the shadow we were living in. And so I discovered these programs and these organizations that help women or non-binary individuals bridge into what are considered non-traditional forms of employment. In this case, it was the building trades. And I essentially started cold emailing these programs who I thought might kind of understand where I was coming from, because they are looking to kind of provide these opportunities for these individuals. And it kind of just took off from there. And so that's a long-winded genesis of the work. Genesis.
On that note, actually, can you talk a little bit about like the circumstances that made the performance possible? Because if these people were actually like working or in the middle of their workday, like stopping and performing and recreating a thing and like making art and like being poetic with you, like wouldn't necessarily be accessible or possible, right? So could you like give some, I think, could you talk more about that?
So I'm very often working in spaces of learning. So I am often, because for a host of reasons, gaining access to actual construction sites is extremely challenging. There's a series of like legal liabilities. And I realized after trying for like a long time to gain access to that it was just a tremendous hurdle that was standing in the way of me making the work. And so early on, I had worked with apprentices, and apprentices are still in the process of learning. And so, like I said, I contacted these organizations that are often associated with either apprenticeship programs or pre-apprenticeship programs. And spaces of learning, I realized, were incredibly wonderful spaces to work for a number of reasons. One, it's incredibly, incredibly rare to see multiple women in on a construction site together. They are so often the sole tradeswoman on a site. Occasionally there will be like a couple, and they are so excited when there are other tradeswomen around, but it provided this unique opportunity to see a group of tradeswomen. And as I said earlier, thinking through the histories that I was thinking through, I wanted to make pictures of collective action. I wanted groups of people working together. And so a space of learning gave me access to groups of tradeswomen. There are also spaces that are uniquely designed for their needs, and construction sites are not. And so it also was a space that fostered a kind of vulnerability that I think would have been hard to have kind of been a part of otherwise. And it also allowed for us to work safely together. And then also for it to not really compromise them professionally because they were on a job and then they didn't get their work done because they came over to make art with me. And so like in these programs, the instructors would understand like, oh, we know what you're doing right now, go, we understand you won't be penalized in any way. But there are instances in the picture of V, which is the braid image, V's not in, she's not in a union. Like she's a tradeswoman just like working as an independent contractor. And so she invited me to a job site that she was just working on. And so that was a context that allowed us to kind of do what we wanted to do because it was her own job site essentially. And then Zoe, I met on a women's build, in Massachusetts, and, women's builds are really wonderful, kind of things that different organizations, but in this case, Habitat for Humanity organizes. And the intention is that there are ways for women to learn. Some of them are experienced tradeswomen and they're there volunteering their time, but there are also opportunities for individuals to learn skills without feeling like they're being judged or critiqued by perhaps more experienced men.
Totally. What's interesting about that, this just occurred to me, is that reminds me of one of the ways in which your work departs from the earlier images of workers from the 20th century that were had a different relationship to objectivity, because the educational space is also in a way a fictional space. Like this isn't the real thing that they're doing. So that's, there's all of these layers of fiction in the can I ask something about this piece?
Yes, of course. Are we going to wait to pivot? Do we want to talk about this one anymore, or do we want to pivot over there? You had a question about veiling?
I have, I'm really itchy to ask about material. And I guess that still, it relates to like everything that's in here. Yeah. I want to ask, like the photographs have such a vivid relationship to the materials and the structures that are containing them, whether it's the frame that you made for them or the space in which they are in, like the space that we're all in. This image here is touching the ground. This one's hanging from the ceiling. This one. Yeah. So can you talk about the materials and their structures? And
yes. So this piece is traveling form 2 after Cunier and Ursula. That's the title of this piece. And essentially when I started thinking about the presentation of this work, it came pretty intuitively that I really wanted to think about how to extend the materials within the image proper into the presentation. So early on, I started to think about how, if we're seeing them work with wood, how could the wood become an extension of the presentation? In the instance of like these two prints, the smaller ones, one is a UV print on Baltic plywood. They're sort of nailing into these wood forms. And then Emily on the right is a glazier. She works with glass, and that is a UV print on glass. And so I wanted, again, to kind of bring these materials outward. And then within that, I really didn't want there to be a hierarchy within kind of modes of thinking about material. I wanted to treat what's called common board with the same kind of attitude as I kind of approach a quote unquote really finished proper frame, or like a beautifully welded wood frame. I wanted there to be these kind of varying experiences of material, but that are treated really democratically. And that in part is that, I think part of the idea behind that is that there is no homogeneous experience for any tradeswoman in the field. It is a wildly heterogeneous experience that can intersect with so many issues related to identity and so on. And so I really wanted there to be a plethora of modes of presentation, for there to not be kind of a hierarchical or authoritative voice in the presentation. And then what I'll say also is that I was also thinking through how could this kind of evolution of material come into the space in the way that I have watched materials change dramatically in sites of construction. So I've watched concrete forms get built. I've watched wood become a complete structure. And so I wanted there to be this kind of flux of material. And a little more specifically to these two works, there were two different artists' work that I kind of discovered over the process of making this work. Ursula Schultz-Dornberg, I've known her work for a long time, but a book called Huts, Temples, and Castles came out while I was making this work. And these are photographs that she made of boys playing in what were called Jungensland. And they were playing in post-war Germany with the waste from construction sites. And there are these incredibly wonderful photographs of kids playing with waste in the kind of aftermath of war. And they're both like really beautiful. And the idea behind these spaces were to create social actors as a kind of an anti-fascist gesture. They were also spaces to sort of control these boys. So they had a dual intention. But these constructions that these boys were making, and notably there are no young girls in these pictures. And so I'm always curious, where are the girls? But these wonderful structures they were building are these incomplete forms. They are these like beautiful gestures out of the rubble. And then I also discovered Cunier's forms, and these two pieces are really drawing very, very strongly on her photo paintings, that are these remarkable pieces that think through images across space and architecture, that really do think through the negative space of the wall and how it's not negative, how it has a tremendous amount of meaning, and how one could use new modes of presentation as a gesture to think through like new forms of seeing.
They feel like they're also so much about deconstruction. Yeah.
I have a question jumping off of that, which is in that image on this far wall, it's multiple images that are almost, it's almost a extended moment of one action becoming multiple actions and the shadow being a body double. So, and it's both of these framed works have given you another way to work with multiple exposures. And I'm curious how the breaking of the frame into its own figure to be read alongside the images provided you with a way to also work with the many images as opposed to just a singular approach.
I mean, I think you put it really nicely. But it allowed a new kind of movement into the work, I think. And I think it allowed me to really have like form come across multiple frames, to have like kind of work and process reveal themselves. and that they're not really film stills, but they maybe have a touch of that, like living in them, that there is this kind of not continuous, but linked imagery that adds what I am actually watching when I am there, seeing all of them working. There is this continuous flow of movement, of action, and these kind of forms allowed that kind of continuous action and flow to exist.
That actually makes me think, did you know what the frames and the materials were going to be like before you stepped into the space, or how much did this space inform how you are presenting them?
So when I won this initiative, Baxter Street existed in a space that was about a fraction of the size that we're all sitting in right now. So I thought I was going to be contending with what feels like a closet compared to like the space that we're in now. And that was just an incredible opportunity for me to think about, like, I can kind of do whatever I want. Like, I'm not limited. Not that we can't do whatever we want in small spaces, but it just like, it opened up my brain to think through like other new forms that this work could take. And like I said, I knew from the beginning I wanted Anna to make something.
Yeah.
And it just like, it was the moment where I was like, there, we actually have the space for that now. I have the space for Anna to make the thing I've been waiting to see.
Yeah. There's so much conversation about making and movement and performance and doing and working and building. But what's interesting is that everything in here is mostly static and suspended in time and invites a slow engagement. And there are lots of images of rest and pause, which is not what I would usually think when I'm thinking of a space like this where people are working and learning and constructing. So I'm curious how you're thinking about, I know we're jumping around a little bit, but
Let's pivot over there. Because you're going to talk about that one, or
it's,
we're gonna just sit.
It's up to you. I just want to be mindful of time,
okay,
because we're coming to time.
Yeah.
So I want to transition to the
So let's turn around because we're going to talk about that, right?
Okay. Yeah. There's also one right here. Up to you. Your show.
No, we're moving. Let's go.
Okay.
Do you want your chair or do you want to stand? We can stand.
I'm going to stand.
Oh, yeah. Of course. I'll stand. Yeah.
Just gonna stand, throw my back. Thanks for your patience. What's cool too is that there are so many echoes throughout the show, right? So it's like there's this image here of rest, but then there are these other moments of intentional pause throughout. But yeah, could you say more?
Yeah. So one thing that a tradeswoman said to me early on making this work is that a man can sit down and take a rest, but if a woman is seen sitting, nobody will believe she can actually do the work. And it kind of struck me as preposterous, the idea that rest is gendered in any way. This should be something that is unconditional for everybody. And also, these are not the images that we see through the histories of different images of labor photography. And so it both became a necessity to introduce that into the work as a way to kind of speak to the absence of that in the past, and then also as a way to sort of make trouble. And when I was kind of early on, when I was editing the work and I was only looking at pictures of people working, I realized like I can't be making them work all the time. like, it's exhausting for me to be sort of reproducing that kind of mode of productivity, this endless productivity. And so it became imperative for me to ensure that there was rest in the work, because that is an imperative gesture. And what I think is also important about taking a break is it's something that comes from self-knowledge. It's not an externally imposed necessity of like having to complete something, get the job done for an external force. It's this internal self-knowledge. And that was kind of a different tone to have in the work. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about this photograph because it's, when you see it, at first you're actually mostly looking at a wall, and then you start to take in all of the other entities in the space. And I'm really interested to know your thought process for displaying it so low.
I'll answer that in sort of two ways. One, when I was making this work, I realized there's a lot of information in a lot of the pictures, and I wanted there to also be a level of withholding. I think, and this picture has almost in a way nothing in it. It is a blank wall, as you say. And withholding is an exceptionally potent artistic gesture. I'm sure you both find this with like your students as educators, as I do, that there's this like impulse to reveal everything and to have to really talk about what happens when we withhold and what space that actually makes and what space allows for. And withholding creates a spaciousness within work. That's sort of the work I tend to be drawn to, is work that allows me as a viewer space to walk into it and to be beckoned toward it. And beckoning was a word that became important for me in this work. It's not my word. It's a word that Bell Hooks writes about. And as she kind of beckons you toward feminism, and I find that to be an exceptionally wonderful and warm way to invite someone to radically change their mind and let go of preconceived notions. And so kind of this space that this wall allowed for the spaciousness for you as a viewer, I hope, to walk into it. And the lowness is to invite you to sort of bend toward it. It's a humble gesture, and it's also a gesture that these individuals are doing all day, every day. But I also think that the frame is resting gently on these sort of rigid steel kind of arms. And there's a bit of tenderness in the kind of way that they cup the frame. And so it has a bit of the duality of kind of taking apart these binaries of tough and soft, which the work aims to do. Yeah.
That's great. Are we?
I think we're out of time.
I think we might be.
We can take a question or two. I don't know, Sydney, do we have time for a question or two? Okay, if there are any. We're friendly. Hi. Good to see you again. I'm going to come closer to everyone and just also sound like this.
I was just, this is kind of a photo question.
Yeah.
And I was curious if you're using a large format, or you talked about bringing the camera to the subject. So that sounded to me like not large format, but yeah, I just wondered like what machine you're using to document.
I am working with a medium format digital camera, and there are several pragmatic reasons for that. One, it's a faster camera than a film camera would be for me. I have shot film, and I've shot large format in the past, but what I'm asking many of these individuals to reperform for my camera is very arduous and very hard. And I want to be able to work as quickly as I can. Also, they have limited time and I want to be respectful of their time. And so it was a tool that allowed for a certain level of speed. And it's also a tool that allowed me to move my body in a way that a tripod wouldn't have personally allowed me to move my body. I'm not as creative as a photographer when I work with a tripod. It limits how I can see and bend. And to do this work, I got in a lot of wacky spaces. And so those were two reasons. And also, I realized early on that being able to show my participants the back of the camera was actually a really meaningful and helpful gesture, because then they could really understand what the act of photographing does in terms of transforming a scene. So what I would do, what I try to do is like make the picture and then I would photograph it with my iPhone so I could turn it into black and white so they could kind of really see right away like what it was they were participating in. And they could see like there were many instances where I'd show people and they'd be like, oh, that's what you're seeing? And it's like that early experience of watching like a darkroom print emerge, that like wonderful moment of recognition or just kind of seeing an image. Thanks.
Can you explain the bookmark that was on people's chairs? I feel like that's something that gets missed when people visit the show.
Thanks, Sydney. One thing that I had like learned and heard about kind of just through being in these spaces, knowing these individuals, is that many of them take pictures of the sunrise. It's a perk of the job that you are up very early and so you can see the sunrise. And pictures of the sunrise are inherently really romantic. But the sunrise for these individuals is not ungendered in the sense that one of the major structural issues that actually keeps women with children out of the trades is that oftentimes there are no daycares open before sunrise. And so I kind of sent an email out to my tradeswomen community saying, please, will you send me your sunrise pictures? I have an idea. I really want to do a thing. Will you please send me your sunrise pictures? And slowly, well, actually not slowly, quite quickly, actually, images sort of descended into my inbox from around the country of the sun rising. And I wanted to kind of create this as a way that you could leave the space with their vision and what they see. And also this question, which is a really important aspect of what they think about and one of the things that is limiting for them. And their names are all on the bottom of the bookmark. Oh yeah, it says, is there a daycare open before sunrise? What I'll add is that there are a lot of unions that are really trying to change that and are trying to provide access to childcare for these individuals. So these tradeswomen are remarkable organizers. The Western Mass tradeswomen are just like a force to be reckoned with. So there is, this is not a stagnant, this isn't a stagnant issue. This is something that people are actively trying to change.
So I have a question for you about, you touched on the installation itself, and that you were confronted with this new space. But I want to hear about how you constructed the size and the framing and the installation. Like, did you think this photograph, I want more or less this size? Or did you do all the framing and the sizing according to the space that you decided to make?
I'd say it's a combination of both. I think there's certain images that I needed to see at certain sizes, certain images worked better at certain scales, certain images I needed small. When I was thinking through kind of the curatorial aspects of this, the first thing that I think about are the image selection and ensuring that the various kind of tonal notes that for me the work needs to hit to be complete were present. There needs to be humor, because humor is a tremendous part of this world. It is a strategy for surviving in these spaces. So there's humor in the work. There are images of collective action. There are images of expertise. There are images of rest. And those are like, there's like 5 notes that the work needs to hit. And so I need to make sure kind of that the pictures that kind of do that are present. And then I start to think through kind of then of those images, what works well at what scale, and then swapping out, like if I haven't hit that note, but I need something at that scale, how can I get there? So it's like, it's a real work in progress. And I do really try to think about the space of the gallery and creating the right presentation of the work for the space that it's going to be in. So I made a maquette of the space and just started playing with kind of the placement of things. I knew I wanted these pieces to be big. These were kind of anchors, the traveling forms. They were anchors. And I knew they kind of had to be, I kind of envisioned them as like an arm span, because that gives you a kind of physical relation to the body. And then a lot of other things kind of fell into place, or had already been, I'd like decided that those needed to be like a certain size.
Thank you guys for coming out. I also just wanted to mention, so Morgan is doing the show as part of our mid-career artist program. The open call for that will open again in January for next year's cycle. It's a free open call if you've been working in photography or lens-based media for 8+ years and haven't had a solo show in New York in the past year, and don't have gallery representation. You're eligible, and I implore you to apply. And we have a really fun program tomorrow from 2 to 5 with Pratt and Lightwork and Dancing Foxes about the circular economies of photographic materials. If you guys want to come back for that. And next Saturday, we are doing a community open house, kind of an end of year celebration, and we'll have art making activities and some vendors and such. So come see us.
And everyone should go to Dashwood Projects on
Yes.
4th Street to see Genesis Báez has a show up right now.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really good.
And also, both Genesis and Carly have brought, did you read your book?
I didn't intentionally.
Okay.
I didn't bring my book, but there's a reason for that that I won't get into right now. But yeah, there's a show around the corner, and next Wednesday, December 10th, from 6 to 7 at Dashwood Projects, I'm going to be in conversation with El Perez about the show and also my publication Blue Sun. Please come; it's just around the corner. Hope to see you Wednesday.
And Carly's
Small
work is
Princess.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, Justine. Small print sale, holidays. And I didn't bring my book because I have very few left, and this one particular copy I was going to bring, I have to send out to someone. So.
Carly's books are there on the table. Please take a look at them. They're both brilliant artists, and I'm lucky that you are my friends. Thank you all for coming and sitting in.